Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Wilson Stribling. Welcome to another edition of At Issue, where we discuss and debate the critical issues facing the state of Mississippi and how these issues impact you. At issue tonight, the infrastructure problem. A bill that would have generated up to $150 million for repairs to state roads and bridges through an internet sales tax died this week. The House originally passed the bill, but it did not make it out of committee in the Senate. Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves says an internet sales tax is unconstitutional. Reeves released this statement. He says, quote, "Because the Supreme Court made it clear 25 years ago that states do not have the authority to tax internet sales, this bill is unconstitutional, and any promised new revenue is simply fake money," end quote. Meanwhile, back over in the House, MPB's Mark Rigsby spoke with the sponsor of the internet tax bill, Republican Representative Trey Lamar of Senatobia.
How disappointing is it that you created that mechanism to help people, but it dies over in the Senate?
Well, it is disappointing, but I've been around. This is not my first year in the legislature, so I understand the process. And I'll just say that the Lieutenant Governor, I respect him, and he disagreed with our policy on 480, and so I look forward to seeing his plan.
Is there any talk about what that plan might be? I know that you guys, communicate between both chambers. What do you think that plan is going to be?
Well, both chambers don't communicate as often as folks may think we do, and I have not yet heard what his plan may be, but I look forward to seeing it.
Is there any other way besides floating bonds or raising the gasoline tax or the cigarette tax or creating a lottery? There's plenty of ideas out there. What's the next best idea to create that road and bridge money?
Well, there's been some talk about nobody wants to increase taxes. First of all, that's always a controversial topic. But we don't have the votes to increase taxes right now as it is, and I'm not so sure that a straight-up tax increase as far as gas tax is the best way to go. But it could have included a combination of maybe an indexing of the tax formula. Right now, it's not a percentage, so it does not keep up with inflation. We should look at that. There's been some talk of, although I don't think bonding is a good idea on road repairs, bonding could be a good idea on bridges, because bridges last 50, 70, 80 years. So bonding that you pay back over a 15 or 20 year period may make sense as it relates to replacing bridges. MDOT has told us that they could find approximately $50 million in savings. That's my understanding. And so we look for MDOT to trim that back some and do their part. That's more money there. And so I think it's a combination of several things. And obviously I think the collection of the internet sales tax would have provided an annually recurring revenue stream that is sorely needed to dig us out of this hole we're in.
The Mississippi Economic Council is making another call for action on infrastructure. Business leaders joined the MEC at the Capitol this week to call on lawmakers to fund road and bridge projects. MEC Executive Vice President Scott Waller says his group has received nearly 5,000 written responses from citizens who say developing a plan to fix the problem must be a top priority in 2017. A joint study by Mississippi State University and the University of Southern Mississippi found there are thousands of miles of roads that are hazardous and that poor roadways affect jobs, public safety, and economic development.
An investment in our infrastructure would boost Mississippi's economy. A sound infrastructure plan would create over 7,000 jobs annually. Our citizens understand how important this is for the legislature to continue to look for a solution that will increase funding now, while at the same time providing a pathway for a long-term solution for sustained funding to address our crumbling roads and bridges.
I'm proud of my House of Representatives this year. We have taken a number of steps to try to bring immediate relief to this issue. Obviously, we passed House Bill 480, which was designed to bring somewhere around $100 million to $150 million of continuous revenue to help address this issue. We're disappointed that bill did not survive. But we've also brought forward a bond bill this year, $50 million in bonds dedicated to bridges in the counties and the cities. We are optimistic that bill will pass. We've also met with MDOT, and we have asked them to find savings within their agency. And they have provided to me a list, which I have still yet to review, but that will hopefully provide another $50 million in savings right there that already exists. These are dollars that have already been given to them that they hopefully can redirect towards roads and bridges. So I'm proud of what we've done in the House. I hope we will continue to search for solutions, long-term solutions to this issue.
I spoke to the Speaker, and he told me that anything significant, he doesn't have about 40 votes. I talked to the Lieutenant Governor, and he tells me that we don't have the votes. And I've talked to members. There are members, both Republican and Democrats, who do not support raising monies for highways and transportation. We, the legislators and the citizens of the state of Mississippi, need to step up to the plate and say to the leadership that we understand what the business community is saying. They're willing to pay, and they recognize that they need bridges and highways in order to maintain a good economic system in the state of Mississippi. We, the legislators, need to step up and begin to say that we are willing to bite the bullet and raise the taxes. We can't put it on leadership and say leadership won't do it. Leadership knows that this is a process, and there are 174 members of the state legislature. If we are not willing as legislators to say to the leadership that we want to do it, it's not going to happen.
We've been tracking several bills during the session. Among the ones that died, adding domestic violence as grounds for divorce. Senate Bill 2703 died in the House Judiciary B Committee. Here are other bills that did not make it. House Bill 555 would have required the Attorney General to get permission to file a lawsuit with a potential award of $250,000 or more. House Bill 974 would have made state employees exempt from personnel board rules for 3 years. And Senate Bill 2634 would have set aside hundreds of millions of dollars the state will receive from the BP oil spill settlement for projects on the Gulf Coast. All of those bills are dead. How lawmakers and other candidates can spend their campaign money is still a hot topic at the Capitol. This week, the House passed its final version of a campaign finance reform bill comprised with elements from a similar bill passed by the Senate. The vote was 102 in favor, 12 against. Senate Bill 2689 would prohibit using campaign finances for personal use and prevent candidates from taking cash in their accounts with them when they close down their campaign committee. Here is some of the debate from the House floor.
Does this include all public officials in the state of Mississippi or just the legislature? Anybody that's got a campaign fund?
That's correct.
Okay, let's just say that there happened to be maybe somebody in state government right now that's got $3 or $4 or $5 million in a campaign account, and they were looking to run for a future office. What does this do with them? Raised from the past, from this day back, or from January 1st back?
Well, that money would be governed by our current law that's in place now.
Okay. But from January 1st on, it would be governed by this law?
That's correct.
Okay. So that if they're running in 19 for something, then they would have to come under this law?
That's correct.
Okay. Don't you think that's a pretty good provision?
Yes, gentlemen. Look, you bring up a point that reminds me. If y'all remember, we did in our bill have a provision that did not allow members of the legislature to raise money during session. Some of you had great reservations about that because other statewide officials would still be able to raise money now, and some folks in this room maybe have statewide aspirations. So there was a concern that there wasn't a level playing field there. The Senate bill did not include that prohibition, and it is not included in this bill. So there is no prohibition during session. I don't recommend raising money during session, but there is no prohibition in this bill. And you triggered my thoughts there. Thank you.
Last year, an investigation by the Clarion Ledger newspaper discovered some lawmakers were using their campaign money for personal reasons. The bill calls for grandfathering money lawmakers and candidates currently have in their campaign accounts. The bill would take effect on January 1st of 2018. The House also fine-tuned a controversial bill passed last year to sweep special funds from state agencies into the general fund. The move was made to plug holes in last year's state budget. The House approved Senate Bill 2625 by a vote of 84 to 32, mostly along party lines. It would make changes to correct some unforeseen consequences of abruptly taking money from state agencies that depend on special funds to do business.
It doesn't fix every unintended consequence of 2362, but it does fix a lot. And so you want to move the ball down the field, even if you can't get all the way to the end zone in 1 year. So I would urge you to vote for the bill, and we'll keep working on it in conference.
A few funds that I'm personally interested in have been taken care of and isolated from what I consider to be not the best public policy that this legislature's ever passed. But you need to get your head clear about what has happened, and you might as well gird your loins and live with it. There is no need for these agencies anymore to levy high fees and build surpluses.
There are some other bills that are still alive. House Bill 645 calls for increasing penalties for crimes committed against police officers, firefighters, and emergency responders. House Bill 967 would regulate daily fantasy sports betting, and House Bill 638 would add to the list of drugs used for lethal injections and provide for backup methods of execution, including the electric chair and the gas chamber. Let's get straight to the point now with views from both sides of the aisle. Brandon Jones is a Democrat. He's an attorney with the Beria Jones law firm and a former member of the House. Austin Barbour is a Republican national strategist. He's the founding partner of the Clearwater Group. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us on At Issue.
Thanks to be here.
Let's talk first about the internet sales tax bill. That failed, Brandon, and it appears that that was the only legislation in play that would have anything to do with infrastructure.
Yeah, Wilson, you're right. We talked for weeks about the need for a thoroughgoing infrastructure program. We've heard about it from the business community for years. Our folks who observe these things through the Department of Transportation have given us a good understanding of where we are. We heard, earlier from Senator Willie Simmons that perhaps the Federal Highway Administration is closing 100 bridges in the state of Mississippi. This is all kind of coming to a head, and we were promised something in the form of a roads and bridges solution. This is kind of the last gasp. Maybe there'll be something else that comes down the pipeline, but it goes back to something that I've argued on this program throughout the session, and that is that this current administration and legislative leadership doesn't seem to be up to this challenge.
I think what we see, there's a philosophical debate with Republicans in leadership in both the House and the Senate. I hadn't really heard much from the governor on this. I'm sure he'll come out. I'm specifically talking about the internet sales tax. There's no question that Republicans, including the governor, want to get something done on infrastructure. You're right. We've got 30 days left. Something's got to come. It was great news that we heard from Trey Lamar, Representative Trey Lamar from North Mississippi, who said that MDOT said we can find $50 million in savings. That's a fantastic thing. I think Trey was smart to say we're going to get him to go look at that number one more time to see if we can't get them to expand on it. But in terms of the internet sales tax, there's a philosophical debate between the House and the Senate right now. The Lieutenant Governor has not come out specifically saying I'm for or against an internet sales tax. What he's come out and said is it's unconstitutional because of some ruling that the U.S. Supreme Court made, I'm assuming the U.S. Supreme Court, that I don't know enough about. You're the lawyer at the table, so I'll pivot to you on that. But clearly the House has said that they're for this. I think it's a good thing. Brings in $150 million in new revenues a year. But the bill's dead at this point in time.
Yeah, I didn't know Lieutenant Governor Reeves was a dancer, but that was a pretty good two-step on his part. Trey was absolutely on the nose because what he was saying was this might not be a perfect solution. And I think you have Republicans and Democrats who might say, yeah, we would prefer that the Department of Revenue to enforce the law and us to have these resources and us to be able to use them as needed. But because of the acute infrastructure problem, this bill was going to dedicate 70% of those funds. And what he says, I thought very pointedly, he said, hey, we get it, Lieutenant Governor, you don't like our plan, show us your plan. And that's a big challenge that sits on the desk of Tate Reeves, I think.
You and I both grew up in small towns in Mississippi. You grew up in Pascagoula, I grew up in Yazoo City. And we sort of have this small town appeal about ourselves. Appeal's not the right word. I'm not sure we're appealing to anybody, but sort of flavor about us where we kind of have a little mom and pop grassroots. I think about the mom and pops, and there's some friends of mine who own some stores on Main Street in Yazoo City who feel like it's an unfair advantage for someone to be able to sell a product, the same widget the same pair of shoes for 7% less than them. So I kind of, that's sort of where I am on this. It is It is a law that's on the books now. That's sort of where I am on this issue. I understand where the lieutenant governor's coming. He says, look, this is unconstitutional. This is immediately going to go to the court. Let's figure out other ways to solve this. And I look forward to seeing those other ways. I understand where he's coming from, but I certainly know, because I think Trey Lamar is saying this is a solution, but I think Trey is also saying this is an opportunity to maybe make things a little more equitable for mom and pops too. So we'll have to just see that process.
Yeah, good point. If you're a small business owner and you're selling a product and the same product is being sold without sales tax, then you are at a distinct competitive disadvantage. And so that is part of the subtext of all this.
And there are others who will say, no, this is clearly raising taxes. Representative Baumgart made that. But I want to make sure we say all the sides, at least for my side of the Republican Party, where they are. Representative Baumgart got up there, very smart guy, and gave an eloquent approach to why this is raising taxes. I disagree with him. So that's where everybody is on that issue.
I wonder if we shouldn't also mention the Department of Revenue. Herb Frierson is still considering how they might proceed with some other elements of this. So I think viewers need to be aware the sales tax issue is not necessarily going away because the Department of Revenue is exploring to what extent it can enforce what it sees as existing law.
But as far as diverting that revenue or earmarking that revenue, a good bit of it anyway, for infrastructure, that died with this bill. And we should point out there is a bond bill that's still in play for bridges. So there is some infrastructure money out there that could still survive through this process. Let's talk about, you mentioned the coast. This BP oil spill bill that would have set aside the BP settlement money for projects on the coast, that died. Did that surprise you?
In some ways it did, in some ways it didn't. I mean, Brandon is former House member. He understands there is give and take. Sometimes you think an issue is a slam dunk. You hit a snag. You're going to get it done next year. Look, there are coast legislators in the House and coast legislators in the Senate who both want to see as much of the BP money end up funding projects to rebuild the coast. There's no question about that. They just got to all get on the same page with the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor and say, this is the best process for that. That may not happen this session. That's okay. It's not the end of the world. But I think next year, for sure, they'll get something done, if not before the end of this session, Brandon.
Yeah, our crack reporting team here at MPB got some good tape this week. And in that interview with Representative Lamar, another thing he said was, we don't always do the best job of communicating with the Senate. You see it in moments like this. You said it a moment ago, Austin. It's pretty obvious that there was not a meeting of the minds prior to this bill coming through. I don't know what all of the various issues were. I know there was some question about who might administer this account. That some folks in the House didn't care for. Perhaps that's where the wheels fell off.
Maybe.
But nonetheless, I think the sad part of this is that you were taking these funds and dedicating it to proper projects on the Gulf Coast, which we know the governor was in favor of. We know that by and large, the Senate was in favor of, because this thing passed like mama's apple pie out of that chamber. And so the idea that they didn't at least come to some agreement to keep that money dedicated to good coast projects down the road is disappointing. But as with everything we talk about on weeks like this, they will have another opportunity perhaps to get that right.
Yeah, and in 10 seconds, there's no doubt that both Bryce Wiggins, who's leading this in the Senate, and John Reed and the other coast members of the House, they're going to get together on this and make this work. They want as much of that money to end up on the coast as possible.
By my math, they live about 7 minutes away from each other, so they ought to have a good shot at that.
Brandon, what happened with the divorce bill? This is a bill that would have made domestic violence grounds for divorce in Mississippi. It's currently not, and the argument is that if you are a victim of domestic violence, it's tough to get a divorce based on strictly that.
There are much better experts on Mississippi divorce law than me, but one of them whom I respect is Debbie Bell up at University of Mississippi. And what she has said is we just have an antiquated system. Most other states have true no fault. We knew we weren't going to get that, but what we have experienced with our domestic violence abuse victims is that sometimes the process of getting divorced is so hard. And if you're dealing with an abuser, they can game that system and drag it out and cost you money. And we've even had instances of people dealing with divorce proceedings for 10 years. So what this bill would have done would have taken that word habitual out of the law, so that if there was one severe act of domestic abuse, you could seek a divorce. And then the other thing it would have done was lessen some of those corroboration requirements, because as you guys know, when you hear of these episodes, they're intimate episodes. There's often not a witness. There's often not a camera or some other way to verify it. And so it's been very hard road for these victims. Representative Andy Gibson killed it. My understanding is that he's exploring other options here. But that was a bad loss, and I know that the senators like Sally Doty, and we mentioned him again, Bryce Wiggins, and others that helped get that bill to where it was. I know they'd share my disappointment.
I'm no lawyer, and I'm happily married, so I'm not an expert on this issue. I just don't know a lot of the details, except that, yes, if someone gets abused, they need to be able to get out of a marriage. They need to be able to go file a lawsuit, file for divorce, and get out of that. What Andy said, what I read was he said in the Mississippi Today was very clearly, I'm working on this. I've got a plan for next week. The judges are not looking at this in a consistent manner, and I've got a solution. I think he realizes there's an issue here. It needs to be fixed. We'll come back next week and see if it was or not.
This weekend, Danny Glover, actor and activist, will be in Madison County at the Nissan automotive plant, along with U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, former Democratic candidate for president, of course. It seems they are upping the ante in the efforts to unionize the Nissan plant specifically. Are we getting to the point where it's looking more likely that eventually a vote could take place there for unionization?
Well, I don't know about that, and I don't really know the history and the details of when they've had votes out there or not. I mean, what I see is we're in America. People who disagree with one another, they have the right to assemble, they have the right to free speech, they have the right to have a march, and they have a right to protest. But let me tell you, we as Mississippians also have the right to say how proud and excited and happy we are to have Nissan in Mississippi since I think '03 is when they came here. I mean, look, what was Central Mississippi? I'm a Central Mississippi guy. I grew up in Yazoo City. What was it like before Nissan? Not like it is now. We've got over 25,000 jobs that Nissan has created in Mississippi. It's a phenomenal number, 25,000 jobs, tens of millions of dollars that they've given back to the community, whether it's the United Way, the Mississippi Food Bank, all these different charities that are there to benefit, all the local taxes that go to the Canton Public Schools, Madison County Public Schools where both of you guys live. It's a tremendous thing. And I think about the people who drive from, I think it's over 50 or 60 counties of our 82 counties who drive to go to work there because they don't have that type of job in their backyard. And then I think what you have to look at is over half their employees are African Americans. That is a big deal. Nissan is there, open doors for the right people if you can come and do that. Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, come there, work, and be gainfully employed, have great benefits, great salary. So I mean, listen, Nissan is obviously a tremendous asset for Mississippi, and I hope they will stay here forever.
But what does this mean, Brandon, to have a high-profile figure like Bernie Sanders coming to Mississippi to fight in this effort?
Yeah, I would say that the idea that Nissan's a good employer and a good corporate citizen of Mississippi is not mutually exclusive from the fact that some of their employees may want to organize. And so when you're trying to organize, you try to get any type of excitement level you can generate. Bernie Sanders brings some electricity. I mean, we all watched that phenomenon play out. Some of us scratched our heads and didn't know if this was going to be successful, but then the proof is in the numbers. Where he comes, a crowd shows up, it generates some excitement. Danny Glover, I mean, who doesn't like Lethal Weapon? Come on. So I'm sure getting people excited. But the idea behind unions historically was, look, this is the institution that gave us the 40-hour work week. It's the institution that helped put an end to child labor. And so historically, unions have played an important role in our country and in our state. And I think that they want a full vetting. And, you know, as Austin said, we'll kind of see where that plays out. But again, I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I think you can have a good, strong labor force that is organized and still have a good corporate partner that's producing and making good cars.
It's just really interesting that they go to a socialist senator from an all-white state in Vermont and New England and a Hollywood liberal actor to come in and lead the charge there. I just find that fascinating.
What did Danny say in his movies? I'm getting too old for this.
We can't say that even on public, especially on public television. Let's talk about campaign finance reform. That has we've talked before about the election reform portions that are sort of associated with this. Those have died. Early voting and online registration for first-time voters. But it looks like the campaign finance reform element is moving forward.
Yeah, and it's a step. I mean, look. we have talked about this in past years. Mississippi's campaign finance is the Wild West. It is just as wide open as any state in the union. We have folks who were paying their cell phone bill, buying custom boots, taking trips, all legally. Clarion Ledger should be commended, and other journalists should be commended for helping to draw out what was going on. Clearly it was an issue, and when the light was shown on it, folks kind of rallied around it. I do wish they had stuck in that proposal that would prevent legislators from raising money during the session. I think it's just good, ethical way to do business. Some other states have it that way. It's a good prohibition. Commissioner Brandon Presley had publicly called for that last year. I like that idea. I think Representative White liked the idea. It just didn't pass this time around. But I'm not going to complain anytime we take a step toward a more ethical, lawful way of doing campaign finance reform.
Yeah, I mean, we just need transparency. That's what government needs. That's what voters want. That's what taxpayers want. That's what people want, is transparency. And that's what we need. As a guy who's run campaigns, you've seen these finance reports, you've filled out finance reports for yourself and for people you've helped run for office. It's a convoluted system. I hadn't seen all the details of this bill. As you said, it's a step. It's a positive step. You know, they need to continue taking more positive steps. We need for people to be able to go to a website, Secretary of State, whoever, click, pull up Brandon Jones' campaign finance report and see, oh, he spent $933 on his Visa card. Well, this is what those charges were for. He bought $933 for T-shirts for his campaign. This is what it was. We need transparency, and I hope that's where we're headed with this.
And it's being done that way in some other states, isn't it?
Absolutely it is. Yeah, it is. I'm a little confused about, well, the money that was raised up to a certain date, there's going to be commingling of funds. I think they've got to figure out, well, you have to have two separate accounts. That is, as a guy who does campaigns, that's a confusing thing. I'm sure they're trying to figure out.
That was a pretty candid part of that discussion.
Yeah.
You could hear legislators calculating, how quick do I have to get rid of this?
But Jason was candid about it too, and he did a good job.
All right, we've got to run. See you next week.